Welcome to the Low Carbon Conversation. I'm Hulusi, Environmental and Sustainability Manager. I'm joined here today with Chris Hunt from V7, Director and Co-Founder. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about V7.
So V7, we're a niche specialist in workplace refurbishment and transformation. So I suppose our formal title is Asset and Development Managers. And what we aim to do, we're a little business of 17 people, and our passion is to transform buildings, reuse buildings, and reposition them to create modern workplaces that are attractive to occupiers and investors, but with a really big, deep green undertone. So we're absolutely passionate about leaving a green legacy. So during the transformation process, ESG is at the forefront of every decision.
Absolutely. And so on that point in particular around ESG, why is it that you've seen ESG as the key focus to your business model?
At V7, we're a very sort of family style business. Everybody's got kids, and we talk a lot about just leaving a green legacy behind us. And that single driver has basically formed our strategy, and that is do things for the right reason, transform buildings and reuse them where at all possible, which means you're naturally saving the embodied carbon that's in the buildings themselves. And that way, we transform buildings through a use less, waste less strategy. And then once they're done, because we've done it for the right reasons, we're left with a phenomenal product. Yes, there's design and amenity input as well, but the underlying driver is do things for the right reasons, leave a green legacy. And our vision is to just create little green dots all over the UK of where V7 have been. And we know we've done the best that we can for the next generation.
When it comes to market drivers, of course, you've got your internal drivers around ESG, but what are the drivers in terms of the investment market, tenants, landlords? Where are you seeing those drivers or those pressures coming from?
So the buildings have to have good, obviously great bones, great fundamentals, good floor plates, good slab to slab heights, good natural lightability, based in good locations. So, I mean, it's just the normal core investment fundamentals that everyone looks for. But those developers that tend to go down the new build route don't really care what the existing building's like. For us, it's all about the existing building. Can we reposition it? And out of the projects that we've done since 2014, there has only been one example of a building that was simply unusable. The slab to slab height, we could touch it by standing on the concrete slab and touch the soffit with our hands. And that was devastating for us. So that's the only example where we sadly have to demolish the building and start again. So from a building perspective, we always look for really good fundamentals. And we know that then by repositioning that and reusing the existing structure, we then have the ability to create a phenomenal workplace, both inside and out, but at the same time, reusing those existing fundamentals.
Fantastic. I think that's a great principle, of course. Refurb before demolish and building new. I think that's a widely agreed consensus. And of course, V7, you work nationally. However, are you seeing any trends in any particular regions? And do you have any stats that you can share around that?
Well, it's funny. We cut our teeth in the regions, which is exactly the opposite to most development and asset managers. Most start in London and work their way out if they need to. Our strengths were mainly regional. So a lot of people at V7 had typically worked in the regional markets instead of just London. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but this is how we feel, is that we feel the regions have to work harder than London. So therefore, the ESG credentials, accreditations, and actual marketing and sort of really getting the message across has to be much more detailed and much more considered. Whereas in London, there's so much demand and so much stock that it almost appears that actually you need to do less and the building will let just as well. So we see a huge opportunity now of taking the hard work in the regions to really sweat those assets from an ESG perspective and bring those credentials into central London. So in central London, our products, I'm hoping, will be of great quality, and they will let super fast, but they'll also be super green, and hopefully adding the super green touch to what I would consider to be standard stock in London should take it to the next level.
And any stats around particular regions which are really seeing that growth around ESG-driven buildings?
Well, I mean, that's a huge topic, because at the moment what we're seeing is ESG is the number one talking point for everybody, investors and occupiers and developers and project managers and contractors. The issue is it's more of a talking point right now than actually an educated process. So is this building net zero carbon from an occupier? Yes, it is. Tick. That's as far as they go. So I would say the general trend, I haven't got the statistics in terms of which buildings are letting faster, but I would say that those that are green are answering every question that an occupier may have, and quite frankly, an investor too. As in, is it BREEAM outstanding, EPCA, net zero carbon? Yes. But the next level for us and for the market and the industry is, okay, BREEAM outstanding is fine, and net zero carbon, it's a good throwaway comment now. How did you get there? How much carbon did you use? How is it net zero? What credits did you use within BREEAM? Are you have you gone for the low-hanging fruit just to achieve a touch just over the outstanding benchmark? Or have you gone and looked through the credits and said, right, which ones do matter the most to us? Waste, water, energy usage, natural light, and really go after the credits that you care about. And naturally, if you do it that way, you're on for a great score anyway, because they're very sort of credit hungry. Those particular items are worth a lot of credits. So going back to your original question, I think at the moment what we're seeing is green buildings are attractive, more attractive than those that aren't, to investors and occupiers, but we're only just scratching the surface.
So I think one thing that I've seen V7 are really good at is taking an asset, bringing the team together, looking at what the landlords want, what your investors want, and what tenants want, and really putting together a story and creating a sort of a hype around that building, and that in itself makes the asset attractive, right? I think that's a key thing that I've seen V7 really implement from a marketing perspective. Would you sort of agree on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just marketing hype; it's actually stuff that we truly believe in. For example, when a tenant comes around one of our buildings, we take them round and we don't just show them, these are the toilets, this is the office space, here is the gym. We show them, this is the raised floor. This raised floor was saved and reused. And the reason why this was saved and reused is because it saved 60 tons of carbon and diverted a huge amount of waste from landfill. Why on earth would you throw a raised floor in the bin or take it to landfill when it's perfectly reusable? It's like saying you never drive anything other than a new car. There's a perfectly good second-hand car market.
Absolutely.
So we show them every ounce of the building that we've reused and recycled, and we're proud of it. So back in the day when I used to be a leasing agent, the number one thing was to have a shiny floor because that presented the best it possibly could. Now, if we have a sticky floor and it's slightly reused, be proud of it. It's going to be covered in carpet anyway. Who cares what it looks like as long as it performs well? And then we show them, right, these are the lights that we've chosen. Aren't they nice? Yeah, they look nice. But during the design process, perhaps the design team or M&E engineers had specified 1,000 lights in a building. At that stage, during the design process, challenge it, get that number down. Can we achieve the same lux levels by using less number of lights? It's a very, very straightforward approach. But when you're walking around these buildings and saying, there were 1,000 lights specified, we managed to install 600, we've saved 400 from the order. Firstly, that saves money, but more importantly, saves carbon, saves transportation of them, and we achieve the same lux levels. Then we go up into the central plant and show a brand new shiny plant, which is brilliant. But it doesn't mean anything to them. So then you contextualize it and say, this is an all-electric plant, and the energy that we acquire is from Ecotricity or another green provider. So we can hand on heart say that the energy coming down the pipes is from renewable resources. When it comes in, it's an electric plant, so it only uses those renewable resources. We've decarbonised the building, got rid of the fossil fuels. And when you start to tell that story, these occupiers actually start to think, well, there's really more to it than just a BREEAM badge or a posh marketing brochure. And if you bring that to life, that has these occupiers come away thinking, yes, they've got transparency. They understand why we did it. And that on top of great amenities and good design should result in a much faster lease-up campaign and also a much more attractive asset at the end to sell to an investor.
So Chris, there's of course a lot of talk around Cat A, Cat B, and developers creating Cat A spaces, as you say, shiny floor, ceilings, and then tenants coming in and completely stripping that brand new stuff out and putting in what they want. What's your views on that?
That is not a good use of materials, because a tenant comes in and they rip down your Cat A and they move it around and then they put it back up again ready for their Cat B. So actually, it's a big focus for us at the moment is which floors to fit out as Cat A and which ones to leave at shell and core. Now, because we've been historically working in the regions, moving into London, in London, a lot of developers and investors tend to leave a lot of the floors as shell and core. And then obviously the tenant can come in, they can have the contribution of the Cat A, they only put it up once, it's much more efficient, there's less carbon used. So I would say that's probably our biggest regret to date, and something that we are absolutely passionate to change. Fit out a floor for marketing purposes, leave the rest as shell and core. What you are asking a tenant to do is have vision, and that is something that if everybody embraces that model in the industry, they will have to. And obviously you can get around it with nice CGIs and fly-throughs and digital content. But it's definitely a place, a part of the market that everyone can work harder on, I think.
Absolutely. And of course, we don't want to be stripping out brand new spaces and being inefficient with resources, of course. So really interesting. So slightly sidestepping here. So when we talk about ESG, people do think of, your BREEAMs, your LEED, your certifications. V7, how do you go about scoping an ESG strategy for an asset?
Well, again, it starts with the fundamentals. So the building has to have the ability to create phenomenal space. But then once we go into the design phase, bizarrely, our first hire is a sustainability consultant. And instead of launching straight into the design team with our brief on what we want it to look like and what amenities we want and what great roof terraces we would like, we actually get the sustainability consultant to set a very, very clear ESG brief, which is in front of the design brief. So it's a very, very clear message. It basically says to the design team, guys, this has to be green at all costs. So
powerful. Putting that front end makes such a huge difference, even in just people's mindsets, I think, of where the priority is for that building.
Exactly. So put that up front. And then the second one is get rid of all the noise in that market. And what I mean by noise is lots and lots of accreditations that actually don't really have any form of power, but everyone's badge hunting. What we really, really care about is very straightforward. It's decarbonising buildings. It is creating a net zero building where at all possible. Now, clearly you need to use carbon to refurbish a building. You can't make it out of an air handling unit out of timber.
Yeah.
But so decarbonise, make sure that you are as close to net zero as possible. And if you're not at net zero, then offset, but offset responsibly. And make sure that the accreditations you are going for are meaningful and powerful. It goes back to my previous point with regards to BREEAM. Make sure you're getting the credits that you really care about. Don't just go low-hanging fruit. So it's more of a organic process than a step-by-step. We don't have a 100-point list, but we do challenge at every stage. But it all stems from the original brief written by the ESG consultant.
backstepping to the investor, right? Do they know what they want in terms of ESG, or are you guiding them to what they need?
I've got to be careful here. I would say the majority of investors, they're becoming more and more educated and savvy on ESG. I would say 2 years ago, it was a box tick. They needed to achieve EPC A or B, BREEAM excellent or outstanding, potentially be in the running for well, but maybe designed to a well standard. And then it was a case of fill their book full of other accreditations like Cycle Score or Wired Score and all those others, which are great, and they all have their place. But I would say that at that stage, it was just box ticking. Now the investors are becoming more and more savvy. There are definitely criteria that they need to hit in order to buy a building. So if it's just not good enough from an ESG perspective, it won't be considered full stop. So they won't even come and have a look around the building if it doesn't match the requirements. But there is still a really long way to go, and that's where I feel I'm doing a sort of shameless plug of V7 here. But that's why I feel we come in, is that we sit in between the investor and the design team and the ESG consultants and the contractors, who are really right in the detail. So our job is to basically disseminate and report the findings of the on the ground, the guys that are actually doing the doing, and convert it into investor speak. And it's working. I think investors are now embracing it. We're working with some amazing funds, that potentially from the outside could be considered to be old sleepy pension funds. Actually, they're not. They're grabbing ESG, by the horns, and they're saying, right, let's understand it in more detail. So the next one we can do is even greener, and they're on that journey. So I would say big change, but always we can go further.
Are there any showstoppers that make an asset completely not viable?
Most buildings can be reused in some shape or form. But from a viability perspective, the buildings that are perhaps were built in maybe the 70s, 80s with terrible gross to net ratios, which just cannot be improved. Maybe the cores are just too large for the floor plate, and the floor plate takes up the entire site, so you can't expand it. So there are buildings with poor efficiencies that you just cannot get around, which obviously in turn means they're expensive to build and refurbish, but you can't let enough lettable space, and therefore it doesn't drive value, and therefore from a viability perspective don't stack. From an ESG perspective, everyone at the moment is asking the question, okay, if I do a standard refurb, what's my build cost? And if I do a super green building, what's my build cost? It's not that simple. You'd have to design a standard building, and you'd have to design a green building, which is entirely different from the original building, to see the difference. The process is actually much more organic, and the green credentials and ESG requirements are fed into the design as we go. So actually, we can't really answer a green building will be 20% more expensive than a non-green building. But we know the sort of ballpark that we're talking about.
Do you see a premium on certified buildings and green buildings?
The answer is no, but I think that's bad timing. And I truly believe that there is a green premium to be had, both in terms of rental and investment value. So the bad news is the timing in the market. There's just not a lot of buildings that are trading. But what I would say is we know now that investors are prioritising green credentials within their requirements. So they may say, I'm looking for 10-year income with a good location to a strong covenant. That used to be the sort of 3. Now they'll be saying those 3, plus the building's got to be EPC B or better, it's got to be BREEAM excellent or better, and they're starting to drip feed those requirements alongside the sort of fundamental investment requirements. So I would say green buildings are in more demand, and you're likely to see the green buildings or decarbonised buildings and buildings that hit the relevant ESG credentials trade faster with less issues, I guess, less problems. I mean, as in, if there is a building that's EPCC, then an investor may chip the price or reduce price because it's sort of a discount for brown rather than a green premium. And I think that's basically the position we're in at the moment. But when the investment market comes back, I think in a couple of years' time, we'll be able to look back and point to how the gap is widening between green and brown.
I think there's a lot of data now where there's what we call the performance gap, buildings being designed to EPC A's and actually not performing to that. You mentioned that it still tends to be a requirement for investors, which is EPCs, and I've heard the same elsewhere. Are you now seeing a transition towards different sort of measurements of operational performance, the likes of NABERS in particular? Are you seeing that transition in the light of this performance gap?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a transition. I'd say it's in addition to. So the EPC is just a bare minimum requirements. But all of these little things, BREEAM, EPC, NABERS, they're all helping make the building perform better. Even EPCs, they're fundamentally flawed, but by satisfying the EPC requirements, your building will be greener than it would be if it was a poor performing EPC.
Of course.
But NABERS is a game changer. And the knowledge in the industry is a game changer. So operational energy is B6. It's the one piece that developers probably historically haven't really cared about. They've said, my building's net zero because they've offset all their carbon through the refurb, so their upfront and embodied carbon is offset. Haven't really cared about the operational side. Now, with the introduction of NABERS and other similar accreditations, but also focus and interest from developers, contractors, investors. How much is my building going to cost to run? And why this hasn't been considered before is mad.
Absolutely.
Because you build it or refurbish it in 18 months, and then you have it in your portfolio where it's operational for 50 years. So the key there is when you're doing a whole life carbon assessment, don't just ignore the operational energy. In fact, that's the most important piece. So accreditations like NABERS, I think, are a total game changer. NABERS needs you to be in it for a year of operation to show the operational energy was as efficient as it was predicted to. But that's a game changer because then it actually measures the efficiency of of energy, and perhaps it will highlight those buildings that actually don't perform as well as they were designed to, and then we can learn from that and go, okay, why did that building not perform well? Why did the other building perform better? Oh, there was a lot of glass in the first one. There was less glass in the second one. The thermal values in the cladding were better in the second one. And it really you start to get into the granular detail, and that's exactly what the industry needs.
So Chris, sidestepping here to a success story of the Here and Now buildings, which of course, congratulations, have won BCO awards for ESG, both regional and national. These were the inaugural awards. Why was that project such a success, or what made it a success?
I think, firstly, we had a great team. It was a very varied team, but everyone had an eye on creating a green product. We set the bar and set the brief with Element 4, the sustainability consultant, and that was we want to create the greenest buildings in the Southeast, arguably in the UK, if that's possible. We registered it as a LETI Pioneer program. We knew exactly what accreditations we wanted to hit. We wanted to produce net zero carbon buildings from an embodied perspective and an operational perspective. So we're super clear we knew where we were going. The design team were all behind it and really buzzed about having that form of challenge instead of just making a building look cool. So, for example, the cladding system is not everybody's cup of tea on the Here and Now buildings. It's original, 2004, powder-coated aluminium sheets of cladding. And it would have been really easy to get rid of it all and chuck it in landfill because it doesn't look right. But what we decided is you work in a building looking out, not in the car park looking in.
Yeah.
So let's embrace what we've got. Yes, we'll decorate it. And we ended up putting these really cool reflective panels on it so you can see the sky.
Yeah.
But the real work was done in the internal refurbishment that was truly considered from a green perspective. Do we need to replace certain elements? Yes or no? If the answer is no, it's kept full stop and you have to work with it. Every glass panel, door, piece of partition, carpet tile, everything was considered to be reused. And a lot of it was. So a lot of the internal partitioning was taken out of the Here building, put in the Now building, was used in the Cat A Plus, which went really well. And so I think the sort of DNA of that development was just in consideration and detail around materials and the reason why we wouldn't replace them. We didn't replace the glazing. That was fit for purpose for another 15 to 20 years, same as the cladding. Because we reused the existing cladding and glazing, we got an EPCB. And we've had a lot of sort of controversy around that. How can you call yourself a green building if you're EPCB? And the answer is, well, we had a really difficult decision to make. The cladding and the glazing had 20 years or 15 to 20 years performance left in it. So how is that green to go and throw that in landfill? So we took a difficult decision to say we will accept an EPCB because the thermal capability of the cladding system was not good enough and the glazing was 2004. Today's glazing, much better U values, much better thermal efficiency, same as the insulation in the cladding. But we just decided that it was not sustainable to strip that building back to the frame and throw everything in the bin. So I think the reason why it's been successful and the reason why we've won those awards is because we've considered the environmental credentials and statistics and obligations at every single stage. And we've been true to that. We haven't just gone, let's greenwash this thing and get it back onto the market.
What you've done on Here and Now is actually create such an attractive proposition for people to want to be in a space that they just want to be there. And I think that's gone way beyond certification there, and is probably geared towards your bespoke strategy for creating ESG during occupation and of the running of the building.
Yeah, it goes further than just doing or refurbishing the building in terms of construction. We've got a lifestyle manager, Rosie. She's brilliant. She's the life and soul of the development. We've got the most amazing guy on the front of house called Calvin. And if you're listening, Calvin, we love you because he's the friendliest man you will ever meet. He knows everybody's name. And that's purposely created and curated to make sure that the enjoyment of the people that come through the front door, it's as high as it possibly can be. Gone are the days where you have a grumpy security guard sat behind the desk and makes you feel uncomfortable when you're sitting in someone's reception. Come into our reception. You can use it for whoever you are for as long as you like. And this thing is about going that extra mile over and above a refurbishment.
So, Chris, what would your top 3 tips be for delivering a sustainable building?
I would say it's got to start with a brief. The brief has to be crystal clear and entirely focused. So that brief cannot just be go and achieve BREEAM Outstanding. It needs to be more detailed. There needs to be targets in terms of operational energy. There needs to be targets in terms of embodied energy. And you need to look back and look at benchmarks such as the REBA targets and the LETI targets to make sure that you're really pushing yourself hard enough. So it's got to start with the brief is number 1. Number 2, from our opinion, is use less, waste less. So once you've set the brief, challenge every different individual design stage and make sure you're using as little material as possible to create a phenomenal product. And then lastly, a really knowledgeable team. The team has to be experienced in working together and with a green focus. You can no longer just choose an architect that produces beautiful buildings but hasn't got a clue about embodied carbon. This team now everyone needs to up their game in terms of their knowledge and essentially be more detailed in the way that they approach everything.
It's fantastic. And so, Chris, before you leave us, if there was one thing you could change in the industry, what would it be?
Oh, I'm probably going to say what everyone says. I think the one thing to change is transparency. I know everyone will say that, but in our view, we think it's time for the market and the industry to share their learnings with each other and not be afraid from a marketing perspective. One thing that I think is required in a very, very urgent way is a second-hand marketplace for construction materials. I know there are a few out there, but if someone can create a second-hand marketplace where from a building that's being demolished or part demolished, a steel can come out of that building, be put on this marketplace, be tested, and then someone else can say, I have a requirement for X number of steels of these dimensions, and match those second-hand materials to the new build. That will be amazing. We're doing a development at the moment on behalf of Orchard Street in Guildford, where the amount of carbon we're going to be using in the refurbishment is about 1,000 tons.
Okay.
And the number one saving, if we were able, because it's got quite a large extension, if we were able to save some steel, all of our steels, and get them from, in terms of circular economy, another building that perhaps was at the end of its life, we would save 774 tons of steel of carbon.
Of course, yeah.
75% of
high numbers.
Huge numbers.
Yeah, in steel, yeah.
But instead, we're going to go and buy new steel, which is horrendous and doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So I would say share your learnings, thought leadership, open your books, discuss it together, find efficiencies, and that will drive the market.
Thanks for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this low carbon conversation, be sure to check out our YouTube and Spotify channel for more conversations around low carbon. Thank you.